Welcome to Session 3, Resources and Capabilities. So in this session, we'll look at Lesson 3.1, SWOT Analysis. What are the company's strengths and weaknesses? A company's strengths represent all companies have weaknesses. We talked about how similarly, in the end, the SWOT analysis process. In conclusion, this diagram gives, having talked about SWOT analysis, a company's resources and capabilities. A company's resource. What are the typical company resources? Intangible resources are harder to having a bundle of resources and a competitive advantage means as much as companies need resources and capabilities to drive their competitive advantage or deliver value to the customers, not all resources are of strategic value to the company. So this brings us to the concept of evaluating the resources to see whether they have any strategic value to the company. The competitive power of a resource or capability is measured by how many of 4 specific tests it can pass. These tests are referred to as VRIN tests for sustainable competitive advantage. This test is a shorthand reminder standing for valuable, rare, inimitable, and non-substitutable, the VRIN. The first 2 tests determine whether a resource or capability can support a competitive advantage. The other 2 determine whether the competitive advantage can be sustained, because if your competitors can imitate what you have, or they can substitute what you have, then it means your competitive advantage or your resources are not sustainable going forward. Resources can contribute to the sustainable competitive advantage only when the resource substitutes are not on the horizon, meaning if projecting forward you realize that there is no likely substitute to your resources, therefore your resources for that period are sustainable and they are contributing towards sustainable competitive advantage. This is a very important point. So the list that we've compiled in the previous lesson, tabling the different type of resources, we could easily put them through this test to see, is this particular resource, let's say it's a central distribution, it's this resource valuable? Yes, it's valuable perhaps because it's maintaining your low cost operation. Is it rare? Yes, it's rare because it's one of those things that not every small retailer can easily construct. You need a lot of capital to build such capabilities. However, other companies of equal size have a potential to build the same resource or capability. Is it inimitable in a sense that can it be copied? Yes, it can be copied. The technology around central distribution is well known. Even if it's a computer system within the central distribution, it's available off the shelf. Yes, you can always buy it and modify it to suit your requirements. However, such technologies are readily available. The most difficult part will be to execute it to the extent that you realize the intended objectives or value that you hope to extract out of those resources. Two other factors contribute to the company's resources and capabilities. Social complexity and causal ambiguity are two factors that inhibit the ability of rivals to imitate a company's most valuable resources and capabilities. Causal ambiguity makes it very hard to figure out how a complex resource contributes to the competitive advantage and therefore exactly what to imitate. You would understand for a company to achieve a sustainable competitive advantage, it should be difficult for its competitors to imitate or even come up with substitute to its most valuable resources and capabilities. So we usually look at the value chain and argue that whatever delivers on customer value proposition as well as competitive advantage should be part of the entire process when it comes to the value chain. That way it will be difficult for your rivals to copy or imitate that, because it won't be glaringly obvious to them as to what exactly delivers your competitive advantage or delivers on your value proposition to your customers. We call that causal ambiguity, because it's not easy for you to pinpoint what exactly delivers that value. It's only known internally by the personnel, but the outsiders wouldn't necessarily understand what exactly is the trick behind your superior competitive advantage. Managing resources and capabilities dynamically is very important. It relates to maintaining the competitive advantage. Rivals that are initially unable to replicate a key resource may develop a better and better substitute over time. Resources and capabilities can depreciate like other assets if they are managed with benign neglect. Disruptive changes in the technology or customer preferences or distribution channels or other competitive factors can also destroy the value of key strategic assets. Rivals that are initially unable to replicate the key resource may develop better substitutes over time. So it's important for the company to manage its resources and capabilities dynamically to avoid these dangerous factors where your competitors replicate what you have or they innovate to undermine your resources and capabilities going forward. But it also goes to changes such as customer preferences, changes in distribution channels where customers now prefer certain distribution channel. And I'll go back to the COVID-19 environment we are in, where people will rather order online than to visit a store. So you might find that you build your capabilities, your resources and capabilities around your stores, but you've never built the capabilities for home delivery. When customers now call almost instantly, because we were all not prepared for COVID-19, and customers are saying, we are not coming into the store, we'd like you to deliver. You might find yourself losing market share to your rivals who are more agile and are capable in fulfilling the customer's orders because they have the necessary resources and capabilities. Companies that know the importance of recalibrating and upgrading their most valuable resource and capabilities ensure that these activities are done on a continual basis. So you can't say you have dynamic capabilities now and then relax, sit on your laurels. Remember, your competitors invariably are trying to improve themselves. There are new players coming into the market with the new innovations. So you need to keep on recalibrating, working on upgrading your resources and capabilities. By incorporating these activities into their routine managerial functions, they gain experience necessary to be able to do them consistently well. At that point, their ability to freshen and renew their competitive asset becomes a capability in itself, a dynamic capability. That is a very important aspect in strategy when it comes to the resource-based view of strategy, the so-called dynamic capabilities, the ability to refresh, recalibrate, and upgrade your resources as the environment changes. Customers prefer new channels. Can you reconfigure your resources and capabilities to respond to that new need? Customers have got different preferences. They want your product in different quantities, variety, different volumes. You need to reconfigure your resources and capabilities in order to meet those requirements, or else there will be your competitor or your rival who's able to achieve that, and they might gain market share from you or steal market share from you going forward, which then goes back to the concept of sustainable competitive advantage. It will mean then when you reach that point, you have lost your competitive advantage, and you have to do something very drastic to recover from that. Usually we'll look at the value chain as a way to analyze the effect of the resources and capabilities that the company has got. The higher the company's costs are above those of close rivals, the more competitively vulnerable it becomes, because it means that your competitors can undercut you. So we have to look at your value chain, remove the fat from the value chain or excess that you do not need. Conversely, the greater the amount of customer value that a company can offer profitably relative to the close rivals, the less competitively vulnerable the company is. And all of this require a thorough analysis when it comes to the value chain on how you deliver on customer value proposition, but look at your cost structure. That way you create a big gap between value and the cost, which results in much higher total value produced or total value added. So the concept of the value chain, every company consists of a collection of activities undertaken in a course of producing, marketing, and delivering and supporting its products or services. All the various activities that a company performs internally combine to form a value chain, so called because the underlying intent of that chain or those activities is ultimately to create value for customers. Hence, it's called the value chain. And a lot of companies will look at that value chain and understand the core processes and the supporting activities. They still have to manage that value chain in an efficient manner, but also to configure it such that they can create what we've already talked about, which is causal ambiguity. Meaning, when value is delivered to the customer, it's not easy throughout the value chain for one from outside to pinpoint exactly where your source of superiority comes from, because it's embedded within the processes throughout the entire value chain. This is a very important concept when it comes to maintaining your competitive advantage and creating that causal ambiguity that we've already talked about. A company's value chain consists of two broad categories of activities: the primary activities, foremost in creating value for the customers. These are the processes that actually deliver on the value to the customers. However, they need the requisite support activities that facilitate and enhance the performance of the primary activities. Things like finance, human resources, because you need people to drive your value chain. the primary activities that deliver value onto the customer. This is even important when it comes to services, where you actually need people physically delivering on a service. In some instances where it's in a manufacturing, you could say it's machinery that will manufacture the product. As much as you have people, most of the production in some of the factories, it's highly automated. So you have very little human intervention. But in services, that's not the case. So you'd find that human resources within services plays a huge role. Make sure that you always have the right workforce on the ground to deliver on the value proposition you're promising the customers as part of your primary activities. In manufacturing, you still need people, but human resource, you would argue that is probably playing a role of a much supporting activity, so to speak. When you analyze competitors, you would also look at the different value chains of competitors to say, my value chain is delivering this level of quality, but my rival is delivering superior quality to me, which means they have a superior value chain. Where am I going wrong? You will try to analyze and compare your value chains. Unfortunately, if then they have capitalized on that concept of causal ambiguity, it will be difficult for you to pinpoint how exactly are they delivering that quality that is superior to your quality. Value chain analysis facilitates a comparison of how rivals, activity by activity, deliver value to the customer. Even rivals in the same industry may differ significantly in terms of the activities they perform. How each activity is performed may affect a company's relative cost position as well as its capacity for differentiation. Thus, even a simple comparison of how the activities of rivals' value chain differ can reveal competitive differences. But please keep in mind that concept of causal ambiguity. Different competitors will try very hard. They employ that principle so that they can avoid a situation where their competitive advantage or their resources get substituted or they get replicated or imitated. They'll try by all means to avoid that. In conclusion, this session was all about resource-based view of strategy that argues that any company to be competitive or build a superior competitive advantage, it needs capabilities or core competencies. But those core competencies should drive its value chain with an objective to some extent to create causal ambiguity, which means that it's very difficult for an outsider to be able to identify what exactly drives that company's competitive advantage or customer value proposition, or what drives its superior financial performance. And all of those things are driven by the company's resources and capabilities. So companies, in order to position themselves in the market, within the marketplace, they need superior resources and capabilities. And such resources and capabilities need to be managed in a dynamic manner. Why? Because the environment changes all the time. Whether it's customers' preferences, new technologies being introduced in the market, a company should be agile enough or dynamic enough to reconfigure its resources to respond to the changes in the macroeconomic environment. Those are the principles of dynamic capabilities.